My son proposed with the ring, and I knew the money came from my inheritance. He presented it to her over dessert at the restaurant in Maplewood, a quiet place on Springfield Avenue we'd been to 100 times. He didn't catch my eye first. He looked only at her, then at the small velvet box in his hand. The restaurant was dimly lit, the kind of place where everyone thinks their conversation is private, but sounds carry. I heard the gasp from the table next to us before I processed the glint of the diamond under the low light. It was happening, not something hypothetical anymore. It was real, and it was bought with money that should have been mine, money meant for something else entirely. If you've lived through something like this, a quiet theft of what was yours, let me know where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious who else this resonates with. He cleared his throat, a nervous sound I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager asking for car keys. Sarah, he said, his voice a little too loud for the intimate setting, will you marry me? Sarah's eyes welled up immediately. She covered her mouth with her hands, nodding furiously, tears starting to stream down her face. It looked like pure joy, the kind you see in movies. I watched her, this young woman I barely knew, crying over a ring that represented my mother's life savings. The modest sum she'd worked 40 years as a seamstress to build, meant to secure my future. The betrayal wasn't just that he took the money. It was the public display of it, the performance of love built on a foundation of financial dishonesty towards his own mother. My stomach twisted, a cold knot forming. I picked up my water glass, my hand steady despite the turmoil inside. I took a slow sip, trying to appear calm, trying not to disrupt the perfect scene he was creating. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, of course. He would have made sure of that, every detail considered, except the source of the funds. The inheritance was not vast. My mother wasn't wealthy by any standard, but she was careful. Every dollar saved was hard-earned. When she passed 2 years ago, she left a specific, notarized document outlining how her accounts were to be handled. The bulk was in a savings account, specifically designated for my future care or needs, a small cushion for retirement, maybe some minor home repairs. My name was on the account as the primary beneficiary, with a clear note about her intentions. My son, David, was listed, but only for a smaller, fixed amount intended to help him clear a specific student loan debt. Not for discretionary spending, not for large purchases, not for diamond rings. He knew this. We had discussed it after the funeral. He'd even agreed it was the right thing, respecting his grandmother's wishes. His promises felt like ash in my mouth now. After Sarah said yes through her happy tears, David finally looked at me. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. Was it pride? Was it guilt? He gave me a quick, tight smile. Mom, he said. Sarah said yes, as if I hadn't just witnessed the entire spectacle, as if my opinion, my presence, my money had nothing to do with it. Sarah looked over, her face radiant and wet. Oh, Margaret, she exclaimed, using my first name. I'm going to be your daughter-in-law. She sounded genuinely happy, maybe even innocent. Did she know? Did she have any idea where the money came from? I doubted it. David wouldn't tell her. He curated his image carefully. He would present this as something he achieved, something he provided. He would take the credit for a gesture paid for by his dead grandmother's foresight and my financial security. I managed a weak smile, a performance of my own. Congratulations, I said, my voice flat. It wasn't the warm, overjoyed response expected of a mother whose son just got engaged. It was measured, devoid of real emotion. It was a transaction. He didn't notice the lack of warmth, or if he did, he chose to ignore it. David had always been good at ignoring things that didn't fit his narrative. He was already turning back to Sarah, his attention completely consumed by the future he was building with her, a future mortgaged against my past. I looked down at my plate, the untouched food, suddenly unappetizing. The sound of their murmured, happy conversation washed over me, distant and hollow. The clinking of forks, the low hum of other diners, it all faded. There was only the pounding in my ears and the image of that sparkling ring on Sarah's finger, a stone cold and heavy with betrayal. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. My inheritance, my mother's legacy, reduced to this, a prop in a public performance. The quiet theft was complete. I sat there, frozen in a tableau of false celebration, knowing a line had just been crossed that could not be uncrossed. My future felt less secure, more vulnerable, and a deep, quiet anger began to stir within me. The days that followed the proposal were a blur of forced smiles and internal turmoil. Sarah was effervescent, eager to share wedding ideas, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. David acted as if nothing was amiss, occasionally mentioning the cost of things with a casual air that felt like a deliberate taunt. They visited my small house in Maplewood, the one I had lived in for 30 years. Sarah sat on my worn sofa, flipping through bridal magazines, pointing out dresses and venues. David was in the kitchen, making coffee, talking loudly on his phone about some work project. I watched Sarah, her finger tracing the glossy pages, the diamond on her hand flashing under the kitchen light. It wasn't a huge stone, but it wasn't small either. Enough to make a statement. Enough to make a significant dent in a modest inheritance. I knew the approximate value of the accounts. I could do the math. It had to be at least a third of what was left, probably closer to half, depending on the quality of the stone. The thought made me feel physically ill. My mother had envisioned that money providing a buffer, a safety net as I got older. David had seen it as a personal slush fund for romantic gestures. The contrast was stark, brutal. I went into the kitchen. David was still on the phone, oblivious to my presence. The inheritance account was a joint account with my name on it, set up by my mother for easy transition and access for my needs. She trusted me, and I had trusted David, foolishly it seemed, to respect the clear intention, the moral weight of that money. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the mug heavy in my hand. I looked at the back of David's head as he talked, his voice animated. He wasn't a bad person, not fundamentally. He was entitled. He always felt things should come easily to him. This wasn't the first time he'd overstepped financial boundaries, but it was the most significant, the most callous. There was the time in college he maxed out a credit card I'd given him for emergencies on concert tickets and electronics. He promised to pay it back, but never fully did. Then the down payment help for his first apartment, which he treated like a gift rather than a loan. Small instances, maybe, but they built a pattern. This was the culmination of that pattern, a grand gesture of disregard. All right, gotta go, mom's here, he said into the phone, finally hanging up. He turned to me, a bright, fake smile plastered on his face. Hey, mom, Sarah's having fun with the magazines. He gestured vaguely towards the living room. She's really excited. His tone was casual, almost dismissive of the monumental nature of what he had done and its impact on me. I looked at him, really looked at him, the son I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed for, worried about, loved unconditionally, and he had just stolen from me, from his grandmother's memory, with barely a second thought. David, I said, my voice low. He stopped wiping down the counter and looked at me, his smile faltering slightly. Yeah, the ring. I kept my gaze steady. Where did you get the money for the ring? His face shifted, a flicker of defensiveness crossing his features. What do you mean, Mom? I saved up. It was a lie, a transparent, pathetic lie. I knew his finances. He had student loans, rent in the city, living expenses. He didn't have that kind of disposable income. Not unless he pulled it from somewhere significant. There was only one significant source he had access to. Don't lie to me, David, I said, my voice still quiet, but with an edge I rarely used with him. That account, Grandma's account, the one for my future. You took it from there, didn't you? He flinched, his eyes darting away. He started wiping the counter again, scrubbing at a spot that wasn't there. It wasn't much, Mom, just a little. I'll pay it back. His words were mumbled. Defense. A little? I repeated. David, that money was meant for me, for when I'm older, for emergencies. He finally looked at me, his expression hardening. Oh, come on, Mom. You don't need it right now. You have your pension. And Grandma wanted me to be happy. This makes me happy. His justification was breathtaking in its self-absorption. He had reframed his theft as fulfilling his grandmother's wishes, twisting her love and careful planning into permission for his own selfish act. The quiet knot in my stomach tightened, spreading a coldness through my chest. It wasn't just the money. It was the complete lack of respect, the dismissal of my needs. My mother's intentions. The raw injustice of it settled deep within me. I didn't say anything more. There was nothing to say. The lie, the justification, the theft, it was all laid bare. He knew I knew, and he didn't care. He thought he could just pay it back, erasing the violation. He didn't understand. This wasn't a loan. It was a betrayal. A line had been crossed, and the landscape of our relationship had fundamentally changed. After that painful non-conversation in the kitchen, a strange tension settled over our interactions. David avoided being alone with me. Sarah still chattered about wedding plans, seemingly oblivious, or perhaps choosing to ignore the unspoken rift. I observed them. Sarah worked as a graphic designer. David was in finance. They seemed well matched on the surface, ambitious, energetic, focused on building their life together. A life, I couldn't help but think, partially financed by funds intended for my twilight years. I watched Sarah gesture with her hands as she talked, the diamond on her finger catching the light. It was a constant, glittering reminder of the betrayal. Every time I saw it, my gut clenched. My mother's careful planning, her sacrifice over decades, reduced to this symbol of my son's entitlement. I thought about my mother, sitting at her sewing machine late into the night, the rhythmic whir of the needle, saving every spare dollar. She envisioned that money giving me security, peace of mind, not buying a piece of jewelry for a woman she never knew, a woman David had only met 2 years before her passing. The disrespect felt profound, a second layer of grief on top of losing my mother. I found myself withdrawing. I stopped answering David's calls immediately. When Sarah sent enthusiastic texts about venues or caterers, I replied with brief neutral responses. My friends noticed, "You seem quiet, Margaret," my friend Susan said during our weekly coffee at the Lowell Diner in South Orange. "Everything all right with David and Sarah?" I hesitated. How could I explain? How could I articulate the complex mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief? The shame that my son could do this? The vulnerability I felt knowing part of my safety net was gone? "It's complicated, Susan," I said, looking out the window at the street. "Something about the engagement. It's not what I expected." Susan, bless her, didn't push. She just nodded, holding my gaze with quiet understanding. She knew I would talk when I was ready, but I wasn't ready to voice the ugly truth, to say my son stole from me to propose. It felt too raw, too exposing, so I kept it inside, the secret festering. I started going over my own finances with a fine-tooth comb. My pension was modest. Social Security would help, but it wasn't enough for comfort, not enough for unexpected medical expenses or long-term care should I need it. That inheritance was meant to bridge the gap. Now, part of that bridge was gone. I pulled out the bank statements, the ones showing the activity in the inheritance account. There was the large withdrawal, several months before the proposal. The date matched a time David had casually mentioned needing funds for an investment opportunity. Another lie. It was all adding up, a pattern of deception and manipulation I hadn't fully grasped before. He hadn't just borrowed it. He'd taken it under false pretenses, planning this gesture all along. It felt colder, more calculated than just a moment of weakness. He had looked at that money, designated for his mother's future, and decided his immediate happiness was more important. The feeling of helplessness was the worst. What could I do? Confront him again? He'd just lie or rationalize. Demand the money back? He didn't have it. It was on Sarah's finger. It was a beautiful ring, I had to admit it, even through the bitter lens of its origin. A significant amount of money, circling her finger, a symbol of their love story that was built on my loss. The injustice of it gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations. The moment he gave her the ring, the look on his face, the sense of powerlessness was crushing. My son, the person I should be able to rely on, had become the architect of my vulnerability. He had taken something essential from me, something that represented my mother's legacy and my own security, and used it to elevate himself in someone else's eyes. The ring wasn't just metal and stone. It was a physical manifestation of his disregard for me. And as long as it was on Sarah's finger, shining brightly, I felt diminished, invisible, and deeply wronged. This feeling of being erased, of my needs, and my mother's wishes being deemed less important than a romantic gesture, solidified into a quiet, cold resolve. I couldn't let this stand. I would. The turning point came during a solitary afternoon walk in the park near my home in Maplewood. It was a crisp autumn day, leaves crunching underfoot. I was thinking, as I always was, about the ring, the money, the betrayal. I felt the familiar weight of sadness and helplessness. And then something shifted. A surge of pure, cold clarity washed over me. Why should I feel helpless? Why should I carry the burden of his actions? He had used my inheritance to propose to his girlfriend. The act was done, but the symbol, the ring itself, was still tangible. It was a physical object. It could be moved. It could be placed somewhere else. The thought, simple yet profound, stopped me in my track. The ring. The recipient. The origin. What if the ring went back? Not to him, certainly. Not back into the account. Back to someone else. Someone who represented a different past for him. Someone connected to a time before Sarah. Someone who might understand the complex dynamics of his relationships, his patterns. I thought about his previous girlfriend, Emily. They had dated for several years, serious enough that I had met her family. They broke up about a year before he met Sarah. I liked Emily. She was kind, grounded, intelligent. Their breakup had seemed difficult for her. David had been vague about the reasons, but I suspected he had ended things abruptly, in his typical fashion of avoiding difficult conversations. I hadn't seen or spoken to Emily since, but I had her contact information somewhere. An old email address, maybe a phone number buried in my contacts list. She was a graphic designer too, I remembered. Lived in Brooklyn. The thought of reaching out to her felt strange, unconventional, but the idea of the ring finding a new home, one that underscored the history David was trying to build over, was compelling. It wouldn't get the money back, but it would disrupt his narrative. It would take the symbol of his self-serving gesture and place it somewhere he couldn't easily control, somewhere that held memory of his past relationships. It felt like a quiet act of correcting a fundamental imbalance. The idea settled in my mind, hardening into a quiet certainty. This wasn't about revenge, not in a loud, dramatic sense. It was about reasserting a boundary. It was about taking a piece of the stolen future and placing it outside his reach. It was about dignity, my mother's dignity, and my own. He had used her legacy, her hard-earned money, to create a public declaration of love with a woman he'd known for a relatively short time, bypassing years of history, bypassing the person who should have been his priority, me. Giving the ring to Emily felt like acknowledging that bypassed history, acknowledging the trail of relationships he left behind. It felt like a quiet, firm statement that actions have consequences, even those performed under the guise of romance. It wouldn't undo the financial damage, but it would chip away at the edifice of control and entitlement he had built. Finding Emily wasn't difficult. A quick search through my old email contacts revealed her address. I drafted a message, then deleted it. An email was too cold, too easily ignored. I needed to speak to her, gauge her reaction, explain without explaining too much. I found her LinkedIn profile. She was still in Brooklyn. I sent a connection request, a short, neutral note saying I hoped she was well and thought of her recently. It felt like stepping onto a tightrope. What if she ignored it? What if she was angry? What if she told David? The risk was real. But the alternative, doing nothing, letting David's act stand unchallenged, letting the ring sparkle on Sarah's finger as a monument to my loss, was unbearable. Within a day, Emily accepted the connection request and sent a polite message back. It was brief, friendly, guarded. I replied, suggesting we meet for coffee sometime if she was open to it. I didn't mention David. I didn't mention the ring. I just waited, a quiet resolve setting deeper within me. The decision was made. The path, uncertain as it was, lay ahead. I felt a strange mix of apprehension and a quiet, steely determination. I was no longer just observing. I was acting. Emily agreed to meet. She suggested a coffee shop in her neighborhood in Park Slope, Brooklyn. It was a gray, cool afternoon when I took the train in from Maplewood. The city felt distant and unfamiliar. I hadn't been to Brooklyn in years. I was nervous. What would I say? How would I explain the almost unbelievable situation? I rehearsed phrases in my head, discarding them as too harsh, too self-pitying, too complicated. I decided to keep it simple, factual, and focused on the object itself. I arrived first and chose a small table by the window. The coffee shop was busy, filled with the low hum of conversation and the clatter of cups. When Emily walked in, I recognized her immediately. She looked older, of course, more mature than the young woman David had dated, but her eyes held the same kindness I remembered. She smiled politely, a little hesitant. We made small talk at first, catching up on the years since I'd seen her. She talked about her work, her life in the city. I spoke vaguely about my retirement, my house, avoiding any mention of David or his engagement. The conversation felt strained, circling the unspoken reason for our meeting. After we finished our coffees, I knew I couldn't delay it any longer. I took a deep breath. Emily, I began, her name feeling formal and important in the moment. There's a reason I asked you to meet. It's about David. And some difficult. Her expression shifted, becoming wary. Oh? She said, her voice quiet. Is he okay? He's fine, I said quickly. Physically, he's fine. I paused, searching for the right words. He recently got engaged to Sarah. I watched her face closely. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her eyes. Surprise? Indifference? It was hard to tell. Oh, she said again. Softer this time? That I didn't know. No, I said. It wasn't announced widely, not to people outside his immediate circle. I took another breath. This was the hard part. Emily, when David proposed, he used a ring that was bought with money from my inheritance, money left me by his grandmother, my mother specifically for my future security. I said it plainly, clinically, focusing on the facts of the transaction rather than the emotional core. Her eyes widened slightly. Your inheritance? She repeated, her brow furrowed. Yes, the money was in an account with my name on it, intended for my needs. Accessed it, and used a significant portion for the engagement ring. I watched her absorb this. She was intelligent. She understood the implication immediately. It wasn't just taking money. It was taking money designated for his elderly mother from his dead grandmother's legacy for a proposal. It was a deep violation of trust and intent. Margaret, she said, her voice full of a quiet sympathy I hadn't expected. That's, that's awful. I'm so sorry. Her reaction was validating. She saw the injustice of it. It is, I agreed, the simple affirmation feeling heavy. And I've struggled with it. With him doing that, with what it means. I hesitated, then decided to just say it. The ring, it represents that act. And I can't bear to see it on Sarah's finger, knowing where it came from, knowing what it cost me, what it cost my mother's intentions. I reached into my bag, my hand trembling slightly. Before I left the house, I had retrieved the ring. David and Sarah had left it at my place briefly the other day, careless with something so supposedly precious. I had taken the opportunity. I pulled out the small, dark velvet box. I slid it across the table towards her. Emily stared at the box. Her eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding. Margaret, what is this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. It's the ring, I said, my voice steady now. The ring David bought with my inheritance. And I want you to have it. I watched her face for her reaction. This was the point of no return. She could refuse, she could tell David, she could think I was crazy, but she just looked at the box. Then at me, then back at the box. The afternoon light from the window caught the edge of the velvet. The air in the cafe seemed to still. The noise of the other patrons faded again. There was only the box on the table between us, a silent, heavy object, carrying the weight of years of unspoken family dynamics and financial betrayal. The decision was out of my hands now. It was hers. Emily didn't touch the box right away. She just looked at it, her eyes tracing the outline of the velvet. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken history and the gravity of the object on the table. Margaret, she finally said, her voice low. Why me? It was a fair question. I hadn't fully explained my reasoning. Because, I started, choosing my words carefully. Because you were a significant part of his life for years. You knew him. Maybe you saw some of his patterns. I didn't pry, didn't ask if he'd hurt her financially or emotionally. I didn't need. Her quiet demeanor, the way she had reacted to the news of his engagement, suggested their history wasn't entirely simple either. This ring, I continued, it's a symbol of him taking something that wasn't his for his own gain, for his own image, and for it to stay on the hand of someone he barely knew compared to the years you shared. It feels like a continuation of that pattern, of disregarding the past, of not valuing the history. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. My mother's intention with that money was security for me, not a romantic gesture for a new relationship built on taking what wasn't his. I looked directly at her. I can't get the money back, but I can redirect the symbol of the betrayal, giving it to you. It feels like acknowledging the truth of the situation. It puts it somewhere that acknowledges his history, not erases it. I didn't say it was a form of quiet protest, a way to upset his carefully constructed narrative, but I hoped she understood. She slowly reached out and picked up the box. She held it in her hands, turning it over. She didn't open it. So, do want me to just keep it? She asked, her voice still uncertain. Yes, I confirmed. It's yours now, to do with what you wish. I felt a sense of detachment as I said the words. It wasn't mine anymore, not emotionally, not rightfully after what he'd done. Giving it away felt like cutting a tie to that particular pain. Emily looked from the box to me, her expression thoughtful. This, a lot, Margaret, she said. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I told her. Just understand why I'm doing this. It's not about you or Sarah. It's about his actions and what they represent. I didn't expect her to be an accomplice or to feel obligated to do anything specific. The act was the transfer itself. The disruption was putting the symbol of the betrayal in the hands of someone who represented his past, a past he'd discarded. She held the box for a few more minutes, the silence returning, less awkward this time, more contemplative. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay, she said, her voice firmer now. Okay, Margaret, I understand. She slid the box into her bag. It disappeared from view, a small act with potentially large consequences. We sat for a little longer, the conversation lighter now, but the unspoken significance of the exchange hung in the air. As we parted ways outside the cafe, she thanked me, a complex look in her eyes. I took the train back to Maplewood, watching the city skyline recede. I felt lighter. The crushing weight hadn't disappeared entirely, but the helplessness was gone. I had acted. I had taken a piece of the injustice and placed it somewhere unexpected. The ring was no longer on Sarah's finger, a daily reminder of my son's disregard. Its new location was a quiet, disruptive secret. I didn't know what Emily would do with it. She might keep it. She might sell it. She might even, against my preference, confront David. Whatever she did, the ring was no longer a symbol of David's successful theft and subsequent public performance. It was something else now, and the quiet satisfaction of that small shift in power was a balm on the wound of betrayal. The consequences, I knew, were coming, but for the first time in weeks, I felt ready to face them. The quiet defiance had begun. The inevitable confrontation with David didn't happen immediately. There were a few days of tense quiet after my meeting with Emily. He probably didn't even notice the ring was gone right away. Sarah, perhaps? Maybe she took it off while washing dishes or sleeping and couldn't find it. I didn't know how they discovered it was missing, but they did. And when they did, David's reaction was swift and furious. He called me late on a Tuesday evening. His voice was tight with rage, barely contained. Mom, where is it? He demanded. No preamble, no greeting. Where is the ring? I was sitting in my living room, reading a book. I closed it slow, placing it on the coffee table. I had anticipated this call. Hello, David, I said calmly. Where is what? You know what, he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. The ring. Sarah's engagement ring. It's gone from your house. Where did you put it? His assumption was immediate. He didn't consider it lost or stolen by a stranger. He knew, somehow, it was me. The knowledge felt like a small victory in itself. It's not here, David, I said, stating a simple fact. I don't have it. This wasn't a lie. I didn't have it anymore. He was silent for a moment, the rage morphing into confused disbelief. What do you mean you don't have it? It was at your place. Sarah left it on the nightstand. His accusation was wild, uncontrolled. She must have, I replied mildly. But it's not here now. Then where is it? He practically screamed. What did you do with it, Mom? His entitled fury was on full display. He wasn't worried about the ring itself or Sarah's feelings, perhaps, but about the disruption of his plan, the loss of something he felt entitled to control. I gave it away, David, I said, keeping my voice level. almost clinical. The simple statement hung in the air. You, vaginan? He sounded genuinely stunned. Who did you give it to? Why would you do that? I gave it to Emily, I told him. Her name dropped into the conversation like a stone. Another silence. This one longer, heavier. I could almost hear his mind working, trying to process this information, trying to connect the dots. Emily. His ex. Why Emily? Emily, he finally managed, his voice bewildered. Why? Why Emily? What does she have to do with anything? She was a part of your life for a long time, David. I explained. A significant part, longer than you've known Sarah. I felt she had more of a claim to something bought with money that was never rightfully yours to spend in the first place. I tied it back to the origin of the funds, refusing to let him forget the core betrayal. His confusion evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger. You did this deliberately, he accused, to spite me. I did it because you took money that wasn't yours, I corrected him. Money meant for my future. Money left by your grandmother. That ring represented a betrayal of trust and a theft of my security. I couldn't let that stand. My voice was firm. There was no wavering, no apology. I had acted deliberately, and I owned it. You had no right, he roared. That was my money. Grandma wanted me to be happy. His rationalization again, twisted and selfish. No, David, I said softly, but with absolute certainty. That was my money. Grandma's intention was clear. You disregarded it completely. The ring was the physical manifestation of that disregard. Now it's not. He devolved into shouting, calling me spiteful, cruel, saying I was trying to ruin his life. He threatened to demand it back from Emily. Threat. I wasn't sure what. Lawsuits? Family shunning? His threat sounded hollow, born of frustration and a sudden lack of control. He had been in control when he took the money, when he proposed. He was not in control now. I listened for a few minutes, letting his anger wash over me. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. His fury felt like proof that my action had landed, that it had disrupted his carefully constructed facade. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke again, calmly. David, I said, I'm going to hang up now. When you are ready to talk like an adult about what you did, about taking the money, then we can talk. Until then, there is nothing more to say about the ring. And I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly, but my resolve was steady. I had faced his anger, his entitlement, and I had not backed down. The quiet battle lines had been drawn. After the phone call, silence descended. David didn't call back. Sarah didn't text. It felt strange, the abrupt cutting of ties, but also quietly freeing. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd been expending on managing the tension, on pretending, on trying to navigate his deceit. With the conflict out in the open, albeit unresolved, that burden lifted slightly. The ring was gone, the secret exposed, the fallout underway. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet reflection. I thought about my mother, about her careful nature, her hopes for me. I felt a sense of having honored her intentions, even if the money itself was gone. I couldn't recover the funds, but I could refuse to let the symbol of their misuse stand unchallenged. That felt important. It felt like a form of respect for her and for myself. I began taking concrete steps to secure my own future, the future my mother had tried to help me prepare for. I met with a financial advisor, a woman recommended by Susan, my friend from the dime. I laid out my situation, omitting the more dramatic details of the ring, focusing on the fact that a significant portion of my expected savings was gone due to family circumstances. She listened patiently, her expression neutral and professional. She helped me assess my pension, Social Security, and remaining savings. We discussed budgeting, potential part-time work, and ways to maximize my existing assets. It was a practical, grounded conversation. There was no emotional drama, just numbers and strategies. It felt empowering to be taking control, to be actively building my own safety net instead of dwelling on what had been taken. It was a quiet ritual of self-reclaiming. I also started spending more time on my hobbies. I joined a local gardening club, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. Digging in the soil, feeling the earth between my fingers, planting seeds and watching things grow, it was grounding. It was a tangible way to nurture something, to create something positive. A stark contrast to the destructive financial and emotional mess I had been dealing with. I found a quiet strength in these simple activities, a reminder that my life was more than just my son's Zans or my financial worries. I was still me. I still had agency. I didn't hear anything from David for several weeks. There were no angry follow up calls, no attempts at reconciliation. It seemed he had chosen silence as his response, perhaps hoping I would reach out, hoping the absence would punish me. It was painful, in a way, the cutting off of the relationship, but it was also clean. The tension was gone, replaced by a clear, albeit sad, distance. My life in Maplewood settled into a new rhythm. My mornings were spent gardening or working with the financial advisor. My afternoons were often for reading or meeting Susan for coffee. I was building a life that was entirely my own, a life not dictated by my son's needs or his betrayals. One afternoon, a brief email arrived. It was from Emily. The subject line was simply update. My heart beat a little faster as I opened it. The message was short. Margaret, it read, just wanted to let you know I sold the ring. Used some of the money to clear a few lingering debts. The rest is in a separate savings account. Thank you again for thinking of me. I hope you are doing well. That was it. No mention of David, no drama, just a simple factual update. It was Peft. Emily had taken the symbol of his betrayal and used it for her own practical needs, gaining a small measure of security from it. It felt like a full circle of sorts, the money returning, indirectly, to someone who appreciated its value and used it responsibly. Unlike Dave, it wasn't my money back, but it was a confirmation that the ring's journey had ended in a place of quiet restoration, not misplaced romance. The knowledge settled over me like a warm blanket. The ring was gone. The immediate fallout had passed, and I was okay. More than okay. I was finding my footing, building my own future, one quiet, deliberate step at a time. The path ahead felt clear, guided by my own choices and a hard-won sense of self-possession. My mother's legacy, in a different way than she intended, was still providing security, not just for me, but for someone else who deserved it.